By the time Beta Garrick's boot struck her ribs, Mara Vale had already counted 3 people in the royal feast hall who did not belong there. The first wore a server's coat but carried a loaded tray as if its weight meant nothing, balanced through his shoulders instead of his wrists. The second kept polishing the same silver pitcher while watching the west doors in the reflection. The third had fresh abrasions across 2 knuckles and no kitchen burns anywhere on his hands. Mara noticed because noticing was safer than being noticed. She had survived nearly 2 years in the palace by making herself useful, quiet, and forgettable. An Omega waitress who remembered every guest's preference drew little attention. An Omega waitress who studied stance, exits, hands, and sight lines drew the wrong kind. She shifted 1 step toward the west service corridor. "Where are you going?" Garrick's voice stopped her before his hand did. Mara turned with her tray held level. The Beta commander filled the narrow space between tables, broad and ceremonial black, his expression already hardened by irritation. "West Service Passage," she said. "One of the temporary staff was assigned by my office. He keeps watching your guards." Garrick glanced past her. The man with the tray had lowered his eyes. "You are serving wine," Garrick said. "Not inspecting royal security." "I know." "Then return to your station." Mara looked again. The man near the pitcher had moved closer to the doors. Not away from them. Closer. She took another step. Garrick caught her arm. "Did you hear me?" His grip was more insulting than painful. Mara could have broken his thumb before he understood she had moved. Her body knew the sequence automatically. Turn the wrist, step inside, strike the elbow, take the knee. Her fingers even shifted toward the first hold. Then she stopped them. "Release me," she said. His eyes narrowed at the tone. "You forget your place." His boot drove into her side. The tray flew from Mara's hands. Silver cups scattered across the stone as she hit the edge of a banquet table and dropped hard to 1 knee. Conversation died around them. Pain burned beneath her ribs, sharp but manageable. What frightened her was not the kick. It was the half-second in which her body had prepared to answer it. Mara lowered her hand before anyone could see how close Garrick had come to losing the use of his leg. "Enough." The Alpha King's voice cut across the hall. Ronan approached from the raised end of the chamber, 2 guards behind him. His gaze moved from Garrick to Mara, then to the overturned tray. "What happened?" "She crossed a restricted route after being ordered back," Garrick said. Mara pushed herself upright. Ronan looked directly at her. "Why?" She could have pointed at the suspicious servers. Instead, she looked past him. The man with the balanced tray was no longer where he had been. He had shifted behind 2 palace guards. The second stood nearer the west doors. The third had stopped pretending to work. Mara's pulse slowed. She finally understood what they had been studying. Not the king. His protection. "They're watching your guards," she said quietly. "Which guards?" Ronan asked. Mara kept her attention on the 3 temporary servers without pointing at them. "All of them." Garrick gave a short, humorless laugh. "You disrupted a restricted area for that. The man carrying the tray has been measuring distance between your patrols. The one with the pitcher watches the west doors through the silver instead of turning his head. The third keeps changing position whenever a guard changes position." Ronan's expression sharpened. "What does that mean?" "They aren't watching you closely enough to be assassins waiting for an opening." Mara pressed 1 arm against her aching ribs. "They're learning what your guards will do when something happens." Garrick stepped between her and the king. Or she was embarrassed in front of the hall and invented a threat. Mara met his stare. "Check them. I already know who they are." "Then check again." The muscles in Garrick's jaw tightened. Ronan raised 1 hand before he could answer. "Do it quietly." For the first time, Garrick looked genuinely offended. "Your Majesty," quietly, Garrick. The Beta signaled 2 guards. They moved without drawing attention, intercepting a steward near the service entrance and examining the temporary workers' credentials against the feast roster. Mara watched the 3 strangers. No nervous glances. No attempt to leave. That bothered her more than panic would have. Minutes later, Garrick returned with a folded credential slip. "Names verified. Seals verified. Assignments verified." He held the paper toward Ronan, then looked at Mara. "Would you like the kitchen searched because someone held a spoon incorrectly?" Mara ignored him. The ceremonial feast would begin in a few hours. Once the hall filled with nobles, guards, servants, and visiting delegates, movement would become harder to control. If the strangers were studying protection patterns now, they intended to exploit them later. The ceremonial toast. It was the only moment Ronan's position, the server's routes, and the guard's attention would all become predictable. They're preparing for the toast, Mara said. Garrick exhaled sharply. Based on what? Based on where they stand. That is not evidence. No. It's a warning. Ronan studied her. How do you know what professional surveillance looks like? The question landed harder than Garrick's boot. Mara kept her face still. I pay attention. That isn't what I asked. She knew, but explaining would turn one danger into another. I can't answer that. Garrick seized on the refusal immediately. Then this ends here. Ronan remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he looked toward his guards. Double the inner rotation during the toast. No visible alarm. Keep the feast schedule unchanged. Garrick's eyes flashed. You're changing royal security because of a waitress who refuses to explain herself? I'm changing one rotation because ignoring a warning costs more than checking it. It was not belief, but it was not dismissal either. Garrick issued the orders. Within minutes, additional guards entered the hall and tightened the protective pattern around the raised royal tables. The west approach narrowed. 2 men covered the ceremonial route instead of 1. Mara expected the false servers to react. They did not. The man with the pitcher continued polishing silver. The bruised-knuckle server calmly collected empty glasses, and the man whose balanced tray had first caught her attention looked at the newly concentrated guards. For the briefest moment, satisfaction touched his face. Mara felt cold despite the crowded hall. She had been wrong. The toast was not their target. Her warning had just helped move the guards exactly where they wanted them. Then we moved them for them, Mara said. Ronan followed her gaze toward the tightened guard formation. Explain. I can't yet. Garrick's expression hardened. Convenient. Mara ignored him and studied the hall again. If the visible guards were being concentrated around Ronan, something else had been made easier. Movement. She turned toward the service passages. The west corridor should have been busy with kitchen runners preparing for the feast. Instead, the first stretch was empty. Mara walked faster. Behind her, Garrick called, Vale. She did not stop. At the staff passage, she reached for the door and felt resistance. The latch moved, but the wood caught against something on the other side. Jammed. Don't open that, she said as footsteps approached behind her. Too late. A young kitchen worker carrying folded linens pushed through a narrower side entrance farther down the corridor. A shadow separated from the wall behind him. Steel flashed. Mara dropped her tray. She crossed the distance before the attacker could bring the blade down. Her left hand trapped his wrist. Her right struck the nerve above his elbow. She turned beneath his shoulder, drove him into the stone, and twisted until the knife hit the floor. The movements were clean. Automatic. Far too practiced. The attacker kicked backward, forcing her off balance. Mara caught herself, but the impact sent pain through the ribs Garrick had already bruised. The kitchen worker stumbled away. Run. He obeyed. The attacker tore free, slammed a shoulder into a stacked service cart, and sent it crashing between them. By the time Mara cleared it, he had disappeared through the side route. Garrick arrived first, sword drawn. His gaze landed on Mara, then the knife, then the kitchen worker crouched against the wall. What did you do? She saved me. The worker gasped. Ronan appeared behind the guards. Mara pointed toward the blocked passage. Check the door. One guard forced it open. A narrow wedge had been driven beneath the lower hinge from the opposite side. Garrick crouched beside the fallen knife. Near it lay a thin metal fastening, probably torn loose when Mara threw the attacker. He picked it up. Mara's stomach tightened. She knew that shape. A narrow locking clasp, flattened at one end, designed to secure concealed equipment close to the body without catching during movement. Garrick turned it between his fingers. Something changed in his face. Where did he get this? Mara said nothing. Ronan noticed. You recognize it? No, the lie came too quickly. Garrick rose. The kitchen worker was still explaining how the attacker had appeared behind him, how Mara had crossed the corridor before he could even shout. Every word strengthened her warning and weakened her disguise. Ronan looked at the jammed passage, then at the witness. You were right about the infiltration. Partly. And wrong about the toast. Yes. Garrick stepped closer. His suspicion had changed now. It was no longer the contempt he had shown a waitress. It was professional attention. You trapped his knife hand, he said. Mara remained still. You broke his balance before he could turn. Then you put pressure on the joint without exposing yourself to the blade. He was trying to kill someone. That doesn't answer the question. Mara looked toward the metal clasp in his hand. Garrick saw that too. His fingers closed around it. Then his eyes returned to hers. Where does an ordinary waitress learn to break a trained attacker's wrist? By surviving people who were better at it than he was, Mara said. Garrick's grip tightened around the metal clasp. Ronan dismissed everyone except Garrick and 2 guards, then led Mara into a small security chamber adjoining the service corridor. The door closed behind them. You are trained, Ronan said. There was little point denying what 3 people had witnessed. Yes. By whom? Mara held his gaze. I won't answer that. Garrick set the clasp on the table. An infiltrator carrying restricted equipment attacks a palace worker. Our waitress defeats him with professional technique, recognizes what he dropped, then refuses to identify her instructors. I said I recognized nothing. You lied badly. Ronan looked at Mara. Did you help those men enter my palace? No. Do you know who they are? No. That answer, at least, required no hesitation. Ronan considered her for a moment. Then help us find them. Garrick turned sharply. You cannot be serious. She identified the surveillance before we did. She may have known where to look. And she saved a worker instead of letting an attacker kill a witness. Garrick had no immediate answer. Ronan faced Mara. You will remain under guard and assist the investigation. No unexplained movement. No withholding anything that directly threatens lives. Mara disliked the terms. She disliked the alternative more. Fine. They returned to the service routes together. Garrick knew every official security pattern in the palace. Mara studied what those patterns left behind. The jammed passage had not isolated Ronan. It had redirected servants away from one corridor, while the increased guard rotation pulled protection toward the royal tables. There's shaping movement, Mara said. Garrick frowned. Toward what? Predictable places. They walked the adjoining corridor. At each intersection, Mara asked where guards would move if the feast hall were attacked, where civilians would be sent, which doors would lock first. By the third answer, she saw it. You funnel everyone. It is called containment. It becomes a trap if the enemy knows the containment plan. Garrick's face hardened, but Ronan said, Show me. Mara traced the routes on the security map. An alarm here sends your inner guard toward the king. This passage locks. That one becomes the civilian route. Your response creates choke points without the attackers needing to create them. Silence settled over the table. Garrick reached into his pocket and placed the recovered clasp beside the map. A short length of dark cord remained caught through its narrow opening. Mara stared at the knot. 2 turns. Reverse bind. Flattened tail. Her breath stopped. She had tied that knot. Hundreds of times. Not here. Years ago. Garrick noticed her expression. You know this too. Mara said nothing. He lifted the cord. This binding method was catalogued after the border defense scandal. Ronan looked from the knot to her. Mara's earlier theory collapsed completely. The toast had never been the real objective. The attackers were not merely exploiting palace doctrine. They were layering another method over it. Once she knew, Garrick stepped toward her. Detain her. Ronan did not move. Not yet. She recognizes their equipment, their knots, their tactics. And she has repeatedly warned us before those tactics worked. That does not make her innocent. No, Ronan said. It makes the question worth asking. His attention settled on Mara. This time there was no contempt in it, and that made the question harder to evade. Were you trained by the border defense unit? Mara could lie again, but the knot lay between them, and every remaining hour made another lie more dangerous. Yes, she said. Garrick went utterly still. Ronan's expression changed, not into accusation, but something colder and more careful. Mara looked at the security map. Someone inside the palace was using the methods that had destroyed her old life. And if the attack succeeded, those methods would condemn what remained of it. How much of it do you know? Ronan asked. Enough to know this isn't right. Garrick folded his arms. That is becoming your favorite answer. Mara looked at the knot on the table. The border defense unit was trained for close interception when formations failed. Corridors, broken terrain, crowds, places where standard guard lines became liabilities. And you were one of them, Ronan said. I trained with them. What happened? Mara hesitated. Years of silence had turned the answer into instinct. Our commander was blamed for a security disaster on the border. The unit was dissolved. Its methods were prohibited. Anyone connected to it became suspect. Garrick's gaze sharpened. So you disappeared. I survived. As a waitress? As someone nobody needed to investigate. Ronan's eyes stayed on her. Why should I believe your former unit isn't behind this? Because they wouldn't fight like this. Garrick gave a disbelieving laugh. Their equipment is inside my palace. Equipment recorded in archives. The knot. Recorded. The corridor pattern. Recorded. Mara touched the security map, careful not to disturb the clasp. What isn't recorded is how we changed those patterns once an opponent recognized them. We were trained to adapt before the enemy could complete the response. Garrick leaned closer. Convenient distinction. It's the reason the attacker escaped me. That silenced him. Mara hated admitting it, but accuracy mattered more than pride. I expected the second movement after his knife hand failed. He used the documented sequence. Then he repeated it instead of adapting. Someone taught him what the records say we did. Ronan considered that. Can you prove it? Not yet. The answer cost her immediately. Garrick straightened. Then we have a confessed member of a disgraced combat unit. Attackers using that unit's methods, and no evidence separating her from them. I saved your kitchen worker. You could still be part of something larger. Mara turned to Ronan. He did not agree with Garrick, but he did not dismiss the possibility either. Until we know more, Ronan said. You remain inside the secured wing. The words struck harder than Mara expected. You asked for my help. I did. Now that you know where I learned to help, I'm a prisoner. You are a witness with knowledge directly connected to an active attack. And a suspect. Ronan did not insult her by denying it. Yes. Something fragile that had begun forming between them went still. Mara stepped back from the map. Then find your proof. A guard entered carrying a wrapped bundle. Commander. Garrick turned. This was recovered from the waitress's storage locker. Mara's stomach dropped. The guard unfolded the cloth. Inside lay another narrow fastening, 2 lengths of dark cord, and a small metal plate stamped with the obsolete border defense insignia. Mara stared at them. She had never put them there. Garrick looked almost disappointed rather than triumphant. Your locker? Yes. Your key? Only mine. Ronan's attention moved to her face. Mara. They were planted. Garrick picked up the stamped plate without disturbing the rest. Of course they were. The first ceremonial bell sounded through the palace. A deep note rolled through the stone. The feast was beginning. Mara looked toward the corridor. If the infiltrators had wanted her merely dead, they had already possessed opportunities. Instead, they had given the palace exactly what it needed to distrust her at the moment her warning mattered most. Garrick gestured to the guards. Take her. Ronan did not countermand him. Mara let the guards close around her. Fighting them would prove the wrong thing. As they led her away, the second bell began to ring. And for the first time since she had spotted the false servers, Mara understood that the attackers were not only preparing to kill a king. They were preparing to make certain everyone knew whom to blame. The guards placed Mara in a narrow holding room inside the secured wing. The planted objects had been brought with them under guard custody. Garrick had ordered them sealed as evidence, but through the clear cover of the evidence case, Mara could still see the obsolete insignia plate, the clasps, and the dark cord. She stopped looking at what they were meant to prove and studied how they had been assembled. 2 turns. Reverse bind. Flattened tail. Correct according to the archived manuals. Wrong according to anyone who had actually survived using it. The final loop sat too close to the fastening. Under sudden tension it would catch instead of release. Their instructors had corrected that weakness in the field, but the adaptation had never entered the official records. Mara stepped toward the door. Guard. No answer. Then shouting erupted somewhere beyond the secured wing. A bell struck once. Not ceremonial this time. Alarm. Boots thundered through the corridor. Mara closed her eyes and pictured the security map. Inner guards toward Ronan. Service passages sealed. Civilian route narrowed. Containment. Exactly as planned. The door opened hard. Ronan entered with Garrick behind him. The feast hall has been attacked, Ronan said. Mara looked at Garrick. You locked it down. Yes. Using standard containment. His silence answered her. How many exits remain open? 1 controlled route. Then you trapped everyone for them. Garrick stepped forward. The attackers are inside. Opening additional routes could spread them through the palace. They already know which route you left open. Another distant crash shook the corridor. Ronan's face tightened. Can you prove the evidence against you was planted? Mara pointed through the clear cover. That knot. We have discussed the knot. No. We discussed what the archives say. Look at the final loop. My unit stopped tying it that way after it failed under tension. The correction was taught in the field. It was never documented. Garrick looked down. So whoever prepared that evidence learned our methods from records, not from the people who actually used them. That proves nothing about you. It proves whoever framed me doesn't know what I know. A guard appeared at the doorway. Your Majesty, the inner formation has broken. Civilians are pinned behind the eastern tables. Ronan looked toward the hall. Garrick said, We move the king to the protected chamber. Mara almost laughed. That is what they expect next. Garrick turned on her. And your solution is what? Release the trained suspect during an assassination. Yes. The answer hung between them. Ronan looked at Mara. If he freed her, and she was part of the attack, he would be placing his life and everyone in the feast hall within her reach. If he did not, he would be following a defense the enemy had already predicted. Garrick lowered his voice. You cannot give her access. Ronan took the key from the guard. I already gave your formation its chance. He unlocked Mara's restraints. Garrick stared at him. Ronan. The use of his name changed nothing. The restraints opened. Mara rubbed her wrists. For a moment, the service passage behind the holding rooms occupied her entire awareness. She knew its turns. She knew which outer route would probably remain reachable during lockdown. She could run. The palace already knew what she was. If she stayed, hundreds of witnesses might see exactly how much she had hidden, and the old accusation would follow every survivor of her unit again. A scream echoed from the feast hall. Mara turned away from the escape route. Give me the map. Garrick did not move. Ronan took it from him and handed it to her. Mara scanned the positions. They built this attack around your response, she said. So stop giving them the response. Ronan's gaze remained on her. What do you need? Mara folded the map. Your guards have to obey me. Garrick's face went cold. You want command? I want people alive. Ronan drew a slow breath. Then he opened the door toward the sounds of fighting. You have it. Mara stepped into the corridor beside him. If you want people alive, she said, your guards need to stop fighting like royal guards. The first thing Mara saw when they reached the feast hall was Garrick's formation failing exactly where she had predicted. Guards had compressed around the royal tables while frightened guests crowded behind the eastern tables. 3 attackers controlled the narrow route between them, striking whenever a guard tried to advance. Stop pushing forward, Mara ordered. No one listened. Break the line. Several guards looked toward Garrick instead. An attacker drove into the hesitation, forcing one guard backward. Ronan's voice carried across the hall. You heard her. Obey. The formation broke. Pairs, Mara said. No straight line. Move the civilians behind the overturned tables. Use the gaps between columns. She grabbed a heavy serving chair and shoved it sideways into the attacker's sight line. 2 guards finally understood, splitting apart instead of advancing shoulder to shoulder. The enemy hesitated. That was enough. Mara crossed the open floor. One attacker lunged. She redirected his wrist into the table edge, drove her elbow beneath his jaw, and took his weapon before he recovered. A second came from her left. She did not meet strength with strength. She stepped inside his reach, struck his knee, turned his momentum, and sent him across the polished stone. The room went strangely quiet around the violence. The waitress Garrick had kicked hours earlier was gone. Or rather, Mara thought, she had never existed. A shout came from the royal platform. Garrick had rebuilt part of his standard defensive wedge around Ronan. No, Mara yelled. Too late. An attacker changed direction the instant the guards formed. He slipped through the predictable opening and drove straight toward Ronan. Garrick barely intercepted him. Steel struck steel. Mara reached them from the side and slammed the stolen weapon across the attacker's forearm. Garrick finished the disarm. For one breath, they stood facing each other. He knew your formation, Mara said. Garrick looked at the attacker on the floor, then at her. What now? It was the first time he had asked. Take 2 guards. Move the civilians through the northwest service gap. Irregular spacing. Do not repeat a pattern. He obeyed. Mara turned toward the remaining attackers. Their movements still carried the shape of her old training, but now she could see the imitation clearly. They anticipated documented counters. They expected fixed sequences, so she gave them none. She changed rhythm after every exchange, using tables, pillars, drop trays, anything that broke the geometry they had prepared for. Then she saw the leader. He was not fighting like the others. When a guard changed position unexpectedly, he adapted. When Mara altered distance, he altered with her. Their eyes met across the hall. He knew more. Mara moved toward him. He smiled. You should have stayed hidden. The words chilled her more than the blade in his hand. He attacked. Mara blocked once, twice, then abandoned the expected counter before he could anticipate it. He adjusted immediately, not copied instinct. Command knowledge. Behind her, civilians were moving toward safety. The leader glanced toward them and changed targets. Mara saw it a fraction too late. She threw herself between him and a woman trapped beside an overturned table. His blade cut across Mara's upper thigh. Pain tore through her leg. She nearly fell. The woman escaped. Mara caught the table edge and forced herself upright. The leader backed toward the adjoining command route. Something metallic showed beneath his coat, a secure document case fixed close to his body. Not palace equipment. He touched it. Instinctively, when he saw Mara notice. There. Whatever he carried mattered. You're wearing dead men's methods, Mara said. His smile vanished. Dead men make useful traitors. Then he turned and ran. Mara took one step after him. Her injured leg nearly folded. Ronan reached her, but she pushed his hand away. He has something. You're bleeding. He protected that case instead of protecting himself. Garrick approached from the civilian route. Mara pointed toward the command passage. Secure this hall. Don't follow the old formation. Then she looked after the fleeing leader. Catching him would require speed she no longer had. Beating him would require something worse. She would have to fight in the way no archive had ever recorded, the way only someone from her unit could know. And after tonight, there would be nothing left for Mara Vale to hide behind. Mara followed him into the command passage. Her injured leg protested with every step. She could not outrun him, so she stopped trying. Left corridor, she called. The leader glanced back. That glance was enough. He expected pursuit along the shortest route. Mara cut through the narrow opening beside a storage alcove instead, using the palace layout she had spent 2 years crossing with trays in her hands. She emerged ahead of him where the passage narrowed. He stopped. You still move like them, he said. No, you move like the records say we did. He attacked first. His opening sequence was precise. High feint, inside cut, turned toward the weapon arm. Mara recognized every movement. She refused every expected answer. Instead of blocking high, she stepped into the feint. Instead of protecting the obvious line, she gave ground on her injured leg and changed direction before completing the retreat. The leader hesitated. Mara struck. Her palm drove his weapon wrist against the wall. He twisted free and countered, but she changed rhythm again. Not a formal sequence, but the adaptive method drilled into her until survival mattered more than pattern. His expression changed. You couldn't have learned that from an archive, Mara said. Neither could you. She did not need to say the rest. He lunged toward her wounded side. Mara let him believe the injury had made her predictable. At the last instant, she pivoted on her good leg, trapped his arm, and drove him into the stone. The document case tore partly free beneath his coat. He reached for it instead of his fallen weapon. Mara caught the strap. He caught her injured leg with a brutal kick. Pain exploded through her thigh. She dropped to one knee. The case landed between them. The leader reached for a small blade. Mara could stop him, or secure the case. Not both. Boots sounded behind her. Garrick, the beta, appeared at the corridor entrance with 2 guards. For half a second, his eyes went to Mara rather than the evidence. Case, she ordered. The leader lunged. Garrick did not question her. He crossed the passage, seized the case, and threw it behind the guards. Mara intercepted the blade. The leader's momentum carried him into her. She turned with it, locked his elbow, and forced him face first to the floor. One guard pinned his weapon arm while another bound him. Ronan arrived moments later. Garrick opened the case under guard observation. Inside were authorization papers, payment records, and palace access instructions bearing the seal of a court official with authority over temporary feast staffing. The leader laughed once through bloodied teeth. You think one seal proves anything? No, Mara said, breathing hard. The payments will. The records match dates, coded transfers, and access orders. Together, they connected the infiltrators to the official who had supplied their credentials, and to the deliberate acquisition of archived border defense material. The conspirator was detained before the surviving court witnesses and guards could be dispersed. For years, Mara had imagined what it might feel like to hear someone admit that her old unit had been framed. There was no admission. There did not need to be. There was evidence. Ronan stood before the gathered witnesses with the recovered case in Garrick's custody. My security failed tonight because someone understood how we would respond, he said, and because I allowed rank to carry more weight than evidence for too long. Garrick lowered his eyes. Ronan looked at Mara. She stood with blood soaking the cloth tied around her thigh, exhausted and exposed before everyone she had once hoped would never know what she was capable of. What do you want? He asked. Not a reward. Not forgiveness. Mara looked at the obsolete insignia recovered from her locker, now evidence of the attempt to frame her. Reopen the border defense case. A murmur passed through the room. Ronan did not look toward his counsel for permission. Done. Not a pardon, Mara said. An investigation. Follow the records. Follow who obtained them. Follow who benefited from the original accusation. Ronan understood the distinction. So ordered. The words bound his authority publicly to the evidence rather than to her innocence because he wanted to believe in her. That mattered more. Mara looked at Garrick. The man who had kicked her for stepping outside her assigned place now held the evidence because, when it mattered, he had finally obeyed her command. And Ronan had risked his throne before knowing whether trusting her would save him. For the first time that night, Mara allowed herself to believe the attack was over. What remained was consequence. The attack ended before dawn. Its consequences did not. The captured conspirator was placed under formal guard, and the surviving attackers were held for interrogation. The authorization papers, payment records, access orders, planted insignia, clasps, and cord were entered into evidence together. For the first time, the story of the attack could not be reduced to the rank of whoever told it. Garrick faced his own accounting. His security decisions had been exploited, and his treatment of Mara before the attack could no longer be dismissed as discipline. He acknowledged publicly that he had struck her without justification and allowed contempt for her rank to shape decisions that should have been governed by evidence. The matter went before PAC procedure. His authority was restricted pending review. Mara did not forgive him. She did not need to. The Border Defense Unit was not declared innocent overnight either. Ronan kept the promise Mara had demanded. The old case was formally reopened. The recovered records would be traced against the original investigation, and surviving members could testify without being automatically punished merely for their former association. For Mara, that was enough to make hiding unnecessary. Days later, her injured thigh still forced her to walk carefully when Ronan summoned her to a quiet palace chamber. He did not offer her a crown. He offered her work. I need someone who sees what trained people stop seeing, he said. Palace security advisor. Independent authority to review procedures. Mara studied him. And when your commanders disagree with me, they can disagree. And when I find evidence they don't like, they answer the evidence. Even if one of them outranks me, Ronan almost smiled. Especially then. She let the silence sit between them. I'll accept on one condition. Only one. I decide when rank is irrelevant to an investigation. His smile appeared then. Agreed. There was something else between them now. Something neither the attack nor gratitude had earned the right to name for them. Ronan did not pretend otherwise. When the investigation ends, he said, you'll be free to leave. I know. I would rather you didn't. Mara looked at him. No command. No claim. Just a choice placed where she could reach it. A knock interrupted them. A servant entered with tea, but Mara recognized the nervous young woman carrying the overloaded tray and rose before she could struggle farther. Old habits. Mara took it from her. The weight settled naturally into her hands. For a moment she saw another tray spinning across stone, silver cups scattering as Garrick's boot drove her into a table. She remembered the counterstrike she had stopped, the identity she had protected, and the 3 strangers she had noticed because everyone assumed a waitress saw nothing. Ronan reached automatically to take the tray from her. Mara pulled it slightly away. His hand stopped. She carried it to the table herself. Then she set it down. Not because someone had ordered her to serve. Not because she needed the uniform, the silence, or the invisibility it once gave her. Because she chose where to put it. Ronan indicated the empty chair beside him. Mara could still leave the palace when the investigation was finished. She could accept the work without accepting anything else. Nothing in the bond growing between them had been decided for her. That was precisely why she sat. Ronan poured the tea. Mara glanced at the tray resting between them and smiled. Once, it had helped her disappear. Now it was simply a tray.